God, I think the fast people, I think it was easier for the people to fast.
Yeah.
Were you teaching yesterday or
No,
there?
no, yesterday it wasn't. Okay, very good. Yeah, how was by you, Yosef? Everything good? How was the
Yeah,
fast?
thank God. Thank God, really good.
Okay, we're on Mem Zayin Oman Aleph, 47a. We were doing now, by the way, I saw in my Gemara, it brings down on the side Mishnas Rishonim. On a Gemara that we had on Mem Zayin, where we said, the Gemara says, Lo yizrok bracha mipiv. Person shouldn't throw a bracha from his mouth. So Rashi says, what does it mean, Lo yizrok bracha mipiv? You shouldn't say a bracha b'mihirut. Don't say a bracha so fast, like you want to get over with it, like it's a load. I got to get it over with. And we have many halachot that we don't do certain things if we don't group certain things together, because it makes it look like we're loading. It's a load. It's a masa. We don't make certain times. We don't say mitzvot chavilot. We don't bundle them up. We don't run out when you finish davening. You're not supposed to run out of the synagogue, right? You take small steps when you leave the synagogue. You don't want to like you're running away. You know, there was the Jewish people when they left Har Sinai. It says that they left too fast. There's a criticism. You always have to, when you're leaving a synagogue or you're leaving a mitzvah, you go away. Similarly, when you don't. Similarly, when you take off your tefillin, it's brought down when you take off your shalosh. When you take off your shalosh, which hand should you take off your? When you're taking off the tefillin, take it off with your weaker hand. It's preferred. Vadi Yosef brings down tov. It's good to take off if you're a righty. So you don't take off your tefillin with your right hand. That means you're removing the mitzvah with strength. You don't want to remove the mitzvah with strength. You move the mitzvah slow with your left hand, so to speak. So that's a little bit of a lesson in Judaism, is that when you do a mitzvah, don't ever do a mitzvah in a way that it appears, or you leave a mitzvah that the mitzvah was a load, that it was a load. And that's how Rashi understands, don't throw the bracha from your mouth. That's Rashi's interpretation. The Ritva says it's a different interpretation. He says, when you say a bracha, slow it down at the end of the bracha. That people should recognize that this is the end of a bracha, right? If you say the bracha, Brachata Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam, and you say the bracha, Ozei Yisrael B'Gvura. Ozei Yisrael B'Gvura. Slow it down the end of the bracha so people should know that it's a conclusion of a bracha. And when people know that it's a conclusion of a bracha, they'll go ahead and answer. They'll be able to answer Amen. Another interpretation of the Ritva is a very common problem today that people have. Is that when the Chazan says a bracha. Good morning, Mike. Shalom Aleichem.
Good morning, Rabbi. Aleichem shalom.
Shalom, shalom. We're saying a new pshat that we said last week at Gemara. It says you shouldn't throw lo yizrok bracha mipiv when you said a shehakol on the drink, right? How do you say a shehakol on a drink? You're not supposed to say it b'mehirut. That's not supposed to say. That looks like it's a load. No, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu. Slow, right? That's how you're supposed to say a bracha. Slow it down. No 100 miles an hour. That's the, because if you say it fast, like I gotta get over with it, right? That's what you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to say the bracha so fast. Say it slow. But there's another pshat. Another pshat is that when you finish a bracha and you're going to be saying another bracha, you have to wait for the people to go respond amen. Let's say you're the chazan and you say Baruch atah Hashem Makel HaKadosh. So you're not supposed to say right after Baruch atah Hashem Makel HaKadosh. No, you ran right into the next one. You didn't give people the time to respond. Same thing with Kaddish. When a person says Kaddish, Shmei Rabba, pause. Give people time to respond. Then, not the Shkadav Shmei Rabba, you didn't give people time to pause. You didn't give people time to, you didn't give people time to respond. That's the other shot in the Ritva says, V'lo yizrok bracha mipiv. Don't throw a bracha from your mouth, meaning don't start the next bracha unless you gave the people the opportunity to answer proper amen in between. Okay, that's a common problem that I see by Kaddish or by Chazarat Hashatz. Okay, if they would learn our Gemara and learn the Ritva, they'll be more careful. We say hello to Maris, who's joined us, and Ariel Maiman, who's live with us. Okay, we did the Gemara, in the middle of the Gemara, Mem Zayin Amar Aleph. The Gemara.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi Farhi said one day a very great thing. He said when we say Shakon and we say it slow, he said sometimes when we're like in situations that are kind of complicated and we want to flip the situation to our favor, if we say Shakon bracha with a lot of concentration and very slow, it could flip the situation, and it could if you're like in a judgment or like you're in a conflict with someone, and you happen to be working, it worked for me once, so I'm sharing.
That's beautiful, 100%. That's great. So the Gemara said that we're back to Zimun. There's a great mitzvah of Zimun that we're learning about. And the Mishnah says, if you had Maaser Rishon, that the Truma was taken off, which we explained. Maaser Rishon is that from your product, from your wheat, from your grapes, and so on and so forth, you go ahead and you give 10% to the Levi. And the Levi has to give 10% of what he receives to the Kohen, right? You don't have to give 10% to the Kohen. You give to the Kohen. The average guy gives the Kohen 2% of the crop, 2%, 1/50th. But but you give 2% to the Kohen, and you give 10% to the Levi. The Levi gives 10% of what he received to the Kohen. And the Gemara says, if the Maaser Rishon that was given to the Levi, if the Levi took off the Truma, the 10% he gives to that he's supposed to give to the Kohen, and then he has a right to eat the food, because the Levi, the same way, if you don't take off your Trumot and the Masrot, you can't eat the food until you take the types off. You can't go ahead and you just planted wheat and you harvested the wheat and you ground the wheat and you processed the wheat. Now you piled up into a nice pile the seeds from the wheat. You can't go ahead and you can't go ahead and eat it until what? You first got to take off your like the same way you can't eat something until you say a bracha. You can't go ahead and eat the food unless you took off the types that you have to give to the. That's called tevel. If you didn't take off the truma, the maaser, it's tevel. You can't eat it. The Mishnah states something that seems a little bit hard to understand. That the Mishnah tells us, I want you to know that when the Maaser Rishon that was received by the Levi, when he takes off his 10% and he gives to the Kohen, and then he ate that crop with you and he ate that food with you, you sat down together, you're allowed to join him in for the Zimun. So the Gemara's question is obvious. Everything is done right. He went ahead, he took off his 10% and he gave the Truma, he took 10% to the Kohen from the Levi's Maaser. So what? Of course, everything seems to be done right. If everything's done right, everything seems to be 1,000% kosher. If it's 100% kosher, what is the chidush that you could count this guy this Levi, into the Zimun? He did what he needed to do. He took off the Truma. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara said, the Gemara said what the case was
What's the question, Rabbi? I don't, sorry, I don't get the question.
The question is, the Mishnah made a statement. What was the Mishnah statement? The Mishnah statement was that if the Levi takes off the Truma, again, we said the Levi, what he receives, the Levi receives Maaser Rishon. He receives 10% from the Israel. The Israel gives the Levi Maaser. And the Levi needs to take off a certain percentage of his Maaser has to go to the Kohen. That's what we said. That's the responsibility of the Levi. And the Mishnah stated that if the Levi went ahead and he took off the Maaser, we took off Truma, from his Maaser, he took off the Truma because we said the Levi has to give 10%. We say hello to Shmuel who has joined us. The Levi who has to give 10% of Truma, that's called Trumat Maaser. The Truma on the Maaser. The Levi has to give Trumat Maaser. He has to give 10% to the Kohen. And if he took off the 10% and he gave it to the Kohen and then he ate with you, everything is good, right? If let's say if he didn't take off the Truma and he ate with you, you can't count him into Zimun. It's like he ate not kosher. Could you count someone who ate, let's say, bread that was not kosher bread? Could you count them into Zimun? No. If the bread was not, let's say the bread was filled with fats from the pig. Let's say they made it with lard, fats with the pig. You can't go in and count them into the Zimun. But the Mishnah says that if the Levi went ahead and he took off the Truma, so therefore you could count them in. He did it. So money Shmuel, money Avram. So the question is, what's the chidush? If the Levi did everything right, so of course you can count them into the Zimun. What is the Mishnah? If the Mishnah does not tell us something which is obvious, the Mishnah doesn't need to tell you that 1 + 1 is 2. I don't got to tell you that. I don't got to tell you if you did everything right that you can count the guy who did everything right on the Zimun, on the food, everything is kosher. You can count them into the Zimun. You know, you tell me that. That's obvious. You can count them into the Zimun if everything was done right. So that was the Gemara's question. So the Gemara answers, you know what? Everything wasn't done right. And the Mishnah tells you that even everything wasn't done right, you could still count them into the Zimun. Now, it depends on what was the thing that wasn't done right, right? Right, Morris? I saw your beautiful face for a moment, right? The question is what it was depends on what was, how far the thing that wasn't right in life. Sometimes something is not done right, you could still get credit, you could still, you're not disqualified. And sometimes if something's not done right, it was so not right, it is disqualified, right? So that's what the Gemara says, that the Mishnah is going to be listing things that there was something not right done, but yet that thing that wasn't right that was done is not enough to disqualify from him to join the Zimun. That's what the Mishnah is going to be listing, certain cases that when it's not done right, it does not disqualify for joining for Zimun. And the Mishnah is going to be listing cases when it's not done right, it would disqualify you from joining for the Zimun. So we're up to the beginning part of the Mishnah, focusing on the positive, on the things that even though it wasn't done right, which is a negative thing not to do it right, but it still does not disqualify you from joining into the Zimun. So what wasn't done right? The Gemara says what wasn't done right was the Levi was too fast. He went ahead and he took the Maaser when it was before the owner went ahead and separated Truma for the Kohen. The Levi went ahead, because remember, the owner, the one who planted it, has to go ahead and take off Truma. He has responsibilities. He gives to the Kohen, he gives to the Levi. Whatever, the Levi got first before the Kohen. And really, the Kohen is supposed to be getting first, and then the Levi. But the Levi went ahead and got first. But it's interesting, the Levi took it at a point that technically the obligation didn't happen yet. You rent an apartment, right? When is the rent due, right? So the rent is due, let's say the first of the month, and you have a window, maybe a window for a week to pay, but it's due the first, let's say the rent is due the first of the month, okay? So here, let's say but before the first of the month, the rent is not due, right? The owner can't say, I'm up to the tenant, hey, you owe me the money for rent. I don't owe you the rent. It's not the first. What are you coming to me and say, I pay you the rent? It's not, am I right, Ariel? You gotta tell me, we got a man that deals with the apartment. It's not obligated. So too, even though, by the way, by the end of the month, I'm gonna have the obligation of rent, but the obligation didn't come yet. It's not due yet. Same thing, Truma also has a similar thing. I planted a crop. And that crop that I planted a wheat seed, and you know what happened? Wheat grew, mazel tov. But for the obligation to come in, for me, at what point is it due for me to pay the Kohen? At what point am I obligated that it came an obligation that it's due to the Kohen? So the obligation to the Kohen is once I separate the wheat, the seed from the chaff, from the stalk. I remove the inside, I remove the seed, I remove the thing that I'm going to eat, and I grind it. I ground it up, and I put it into a pile, and I smoothed out the pile. At that moment, now the rent is due. At that moment, the obligation of the Truma is due to the Kohen. Until that time, technically, it's not due yet. It's not due to the Kohen.
But at the time you do the separation, you know it's allocated to Kuma, you cannot hold on to it and say, I give it later.
But once you went ahead and see, Ariel's bringing up a good point. Once you went ahead and you made the pile, you ground it, and until you ground it and did that, you don't have to give it to the Kohen. It's not due to the Kohen. It's not the first of the month. But it's called Gemar Malachto. Once you finish processing the wheat, you ground it. Now it's ready to roll. It's like ready to eat pretty much. Because you already ground it. Not ready to eat. It's in the stage. It's in the raw stage, and now you're ready to cook it, or you're ready to, right? Because you already ground up the thing, and you're ready put it into the pile. It's already processed in a way, ready to roll. So the Gemara says that the Levi got it before it reached that level, while it was still in the stalk. The 10% that he got was while it was in the stalk. So at that time, the Gemara says, since while it's in the stalk, the obligation of Truma did not yet come yet. And what's going to happen is, in a certain way, in contrast to rent, that eventually you're going to have to pay the rent when the first of the month comes. In this situation, when the Levi grabs his 10% while it was in the stalk, the Torah says the Levi has to give one type of tithe. The pasuk says, "Varimosem imenu trumat Hashem maser min hamaser." The pasuk says that the Levi has to give. Now that the Levi got his 10%, he got it early before the food was processed. He has to give 10% to the Kohen. But even though this food that he took, there was 2% of this food was supposed to have been given to the Kohen, because the Kohen was supposed to get 2% of the original crop, and he did not get the 2% of the original. He gets 2% of the original plus 10% of what the Levi received. Now he's only getting 10% of what the Levi received, but he never got that 2% that the original owner was supposed to take off. There's the owner, the Yisrael, there's the Kohen, and there's the Levi. We have three people, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. The Yisrael, let's say, is the owner. He was supposed to give 2% to the Kohen. He did not give the 2%. The Levi got the 10% of the crop as maaser. He got 10%, and he's going to give 10% from his 10%, but to the Kohen. But the original 2% that was supposed to go to the Kohen never reached the Kohen. And the Gemara says, the pasuk says, the Levi doesn't. If the Levi got it at that time, he's not responsible to give both the 10% to the Kohen and both the 2% that was supposed to have been given to the Kohen. That's the Torah has this leniency in that case. Because it says maaser min hamaser, and not, he doesn't have to take off Truma Gedola and Trumat Maaser. That's what the Gemara says. And that's the case of the Mishnah. The case of the Mishnah is when the Levi has food, and that food, that Maaser Rishon, that he received 10%, and he gave 10% of his earning of what he received to the Kohen. But he didn't. But this food was not the original 2% was not taken off. He still, if he ate that food with you, you could count him in that Maaser that he's allowed to eat with you, and it's not called that he ate something not kosher because the Kohen never got his original 2%. That's what the Gemara says. That is the chidush. The chidush was that there was a 2% that the Kohen never got from this crop, and yet you could count the Levi when he eats such a food that he could count them in, since the Levi did separate 10%, Trumat Maaser. That's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara has the question, Amalei Rapopel Abaye, the last line of the page, Amem Zayin Amen Aleph. Ihachi afilik dimu b'kri nami. So the Gemara says, why do we say that the Levi got it while it was in the stalk, before it was processed? Even if the Levi got it after it was processed, after it was ground, and after it's in the pile, why don't we say that the Levi only has to take off the Truma 10%, the Trumat Maaser, and not the other 2% that it was never taken off? Why does the rabbi need to say that the case of the Mishnah that says that you can count the Levi in is when the Levi got the food and when it was in the raw stage, that the early stage that it was in its stalk, in the stalks. Even if the Levi got it after it was ground and the seed was separated from the bad part and it was piled in a pile, even when at that point, why don't we say if the Levi got it at that point before the Truma Gedolah was taken off, before that original 2% was taken off? Why don't we say that you could join him into the Zimun? Why do we need to say specifically that it was only when it was the Levi got it when it was in the store? Morning, Avi. So the Gemara answers, morning, Sammy. So the Gemara says, Amalei, who gave the share downstairs? You gave it, Sammy? So the Gemara says, Amalei, Alecha Amakra. So he says, because for your case, if the Levi got it at the time that the food was already ground and processed and piled up in that case, the pasuk says in that case the Levi has to take off the original 2% that was not taken off by the Yisrael, by the owner. Now we're turning the page. Mem Zayin on the base. Alecha Amakra Mikol Masro Seichem Terimu. From all your masrot, from all the masrot that you gotta separate. And Rashi says, the pasuk continues, Eis kol trumat Hashem. You have to separate Eis kol trumat Hashem. All the truma that's involved, that's in this food. That means if you went ahead and you got it from the Yisrael before the Yisrael gave the Kohen what was due to the Kohen, and really first goes to the Kohen and then to the Levi. But if the Levi jumped the gun and he got the 10% first, not only does the Levi have to go ahead and give the 10% from his 10% that he earned, the Levi also has to give the 2% that was due to the Kohen from the Yisrael. Okay, you got it clear, everybody? There's 2% from the Yisrael that's supposed to go to the Kohen, and there's 10% of the Levi's earnings that go to the Kohen. So if the Levi got it before the Yisrael gave the Kohen the 2%, the Levi got to take off double. His 10% plus the 2% that originally was supposed to go to the Kohen. So the Gemara says, Umay Ra'id. Why do you say that there's a difference between when the Levi got it? If the Levi got it, received his Maaseh in the state of the stalks, while it was in stalks, where you say then you could count him into Zimun, and you say he's not obligated to take off the original 2%. But if he got it when it was already finished and totally processed, he has to go ahead and take off both the Truma Gedolah and the Truma Maaser, the original 2% and the 10%. So the Gemara says, Hi Idgan, Bahai Lo Idgan. So the Gemara says because one was once the Torah says the Gancha. The Torah says Reishit the Gancha Titin Lo. You got to give the first of your the Reishit the Gancha of your Dagan, of your grain. And when the Torah refers to grain, when the Torah uses the language of Dagan, Dagan is referring to after you separated the seed from the chaff, from the shell, and you ground it, and you put it into the pile, and you smoothed the pile, you made a nice pile. That's called Dagan. So if the Levi received it, once it was in the state of Dagan, that it was totally processed, so at that point, the obligation of Truma, it's like the first of the month in the renter. That means the rent is due the first of the month. So that means once it was the Gancha, it reached the level of obligation to the Kohen. So once the rent was due, so if you took it at the time that it was already due to the Kohen from the Yisrael, then even though you took it before it was given to the Kohen, that 2% still has to be given to the Kohen. You too, Sammy. That's why it doesn't help the Levi getting his 10% at that point to say that he's exempt from giving the original 2%. Because once the food was called Dagan, it has to go ahead and be separated. And it's like the due date, it's the first of the month. Then you have to go ahead, and it doesn't help the Levi got his 10% first before that was given. So then the Levi got to take off Ace Kol Trumat Hashem, everything. He has to take 10% of what he earned. He has to give to the Kohen, and then another 2. He has to give a 2% what was belonged to the Kohen. And I would think he would first take off the 2% to the Kohen that was due from the Israel to the Kohen, and then he goes ahead on what's left. He takes off 10%. So similarly, the Gemara says, Maaseh Sheni v'hekdesh nivdu. The Mishnah said that if there was Maaseh Sheni v'hekdesh, everyone knows Maaseh Sheni. We were speaking before about Maaseh Rishon. Maaseh Rishon is the 10% that goes to the Levi. It's called Maaseh Rishon. It's the first tithe that you take off, Rishon. Rishon means Reishit. Rishon is first. That's Maaseh Rishon. He went ahead and you give 10% to the Levi. After you give 10% to the Levi, then on what's left, you give 10% of the remaining crop that you have you take to Yerushalayim. It's for yourself. Maaseh Sheni belongs to you, belongs to the Israel, belongs to the owner. You bring it to Jerusalem, and you eat it in Jerusalem, whether you want to eat it, your family members eat it. That's Maaseh Sheni. And the way the Sefer Chinuch explains, Hashem created in the system that people have to spend a lot of time in the holy city. That Hashem, because you can have a certain amount of your food, of your crop, 10% has to be eaten in the old city in Jerusalem, which in a 7-year cycle, Shemitah is the 7th year, the first and second year, and the 4th and the 5th year, 4 out of those 7 years, you have to have 10%. You have to be in Jerusalem. 4 out of every 7 years, and you're going to be in Jerusalem, and you're going to be eating in Maaser in Jerusalem. So if you're not going to go, you'll send your kids to Jerusalem. And what will happen when they'll be in Jerusalem? They'll be the Sanhedrin. Lahavdil, there's the Supreme Court in Washington. We have our Sanhedrin, our holy court. I don't know, they call them Supreme Court. I don't know if that's the right name for them. But we have such a holy court in Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin. And you go to such a place where it's a holy city. And people, there's so much Torah, so much Yiras Shamayim in the old city. The greatest rabbis are there, and the children will be so inspired, they'll bring it back to their parents. They'll educate their parents, and they'll learn. They'll have time to study. Their food's paid for. So they have what kind of expenses? It's not like today. There's so many other expenses that people have. They'll have that's it. You got the food is taken care of, and they'll figure out where to sleep. They'll find a place to sleep, and then they'll go ahead and they'll be able to learn, and they'll able to learn and grow. So the Gemara, so the Mishnah says, now the Torah also says that Masa Sheni you could redeem. If it's too hard for you, too heavy for you to carry it to Jerusalem, what could you do with the Masa Sheni, the food? You could redeem it onto coins and then take the coins to Jerusalem and then buy the food in Jerusalem with the coins. And then once you redeem it, then you could eat the food. Similarly, and you don't have to bring it to Jerusalem once you redeemed it. Similarly, by Hegdish. If you redeem Hegdish, let's say I said, I'm making this my crop. I want to sanctify, I want it to go belong to Hegdish. But if I want to redeem it and keep it for myself, I could redeem it and put the holiness of the crop onto coins. And then the coins have to be given to Hegdish. But each time I redeem it, if I redeem it, I don't do the original, I have to give it 20%. I have to add on 20% to the Hegdish or Ma'aseh Sheni. So the Mishnah says, Ma'aseh Sheni v'Hegdish v'niftu. Ma'aseh Sheni and Hegdish that were redeemed, if they were redeemed, then I ate the food that was redeemed with the other members, I can count them into Zimun. So the Gemara says, of course, you can count them as Zimun. Why not? He redeemed it. It's 100% kosher. If he didn't redeem it, and then he ate it outside Jerusalem, it's a big sin. You can't eat the food that was not the Ma'aseh Sheni, that you can't eat it outside Jerusalem. But if I redeemed it, then I could eat the food outside Jerusalem. I redeemed it. It's no more holy. So the Gemara answers, and we're going to end with this. He gave the principle. That means he redeemed it, let's say, and he redeemed it onto $100. And then or the Hegdish, he redeemed $100 worth. But he was supposed to give 120. So to add a fifth, but he did not add the fifth. So even though he did not add the fifth, but he gave the principal amount he did give. So then we say he redeemed it. That even though you didn't give the fifth, you still have a right to eat this food, even though you only paid for it, the principal of the food, even though you didn't give the extra 20%. And therefore it's considered redeemed properly. It's redeemed, even though you didn't give it 20%, you still have to give it. And therefore it does not invalidate you from joining into the Zimun, because the thing that you did wrong is not enough wrong to invalidate you from joining the Zimun. Okay, I want to wish everyone a great day. We should always do everything right and everything good to everybody. And we should have the Beit HaMikdash back soon. We should be able to bring the Ma'aseh Sheni to Jerusalem. This is what we're supposed to be doing, hopefully very soon.
Amen. Chazak, Rabbi. Have a beautiful
Great day,
day.
everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here, everybody.
Thank you.
Kiva. Bye.
Great day. So many beautiful faces. Thank you. Morris, when are we going to
How are
have
you,
you
Rabbi?
tomorrow?
No, I'll be back Wednesday and Thursday. It's my summer schedule.
Okay. Whatever we could get if we want. We'll take what we could get.
Me too, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, Morris. Have a great day.
How's your fast, Rabbi? Good?
Thank God. Thank God. By you? How was by you?
Thank God, all good.